So it's that time of the year again when we take a look back at the year that's just passed us and talk about some of our favourites and least favourite things. Every single year I've always done what I think are the worst songs of the year, and last year I did my favourite albums of the year. This year I kind of want to do something a little bit different and talk about a lot more stuff. I've tried to watch as many of the big films that have come out this year. I've been to loads of gigs, there's been loads of songs that I've really been into. So as well as doing my normal worst songs and worst albums list, I'm hoping to do this video here, my favourite films and also my favourite songs of the year. So I'm just going to look at some of the gigs that I've been to this year, some of my favourite shows, some of the best live bands that I've seen this year, and just talk a little bit informally about them. So out of all the bands I've seen, which surprisingly ended up being quite a lot by the end of the year, I just took probably the best 10. So I'm just going to go over them and just talk about what I liked about their shows, their set lists and stuff like that. First up we have Bloc Party, who I saw on their recent Silent Alarm tour. I saw them at Alexandra Palace in London. On this tour they played the entirety of their album Silent Alarm, and considering that's one of my favourite albums, I was really excited to see them. I'd seen this lead singer Kelly Okereke do a live acoustic show last year and I really enjoyed it, so I was excited to see the full band together, especially playing one of my favourite albums from front to back. And I wasn't disappointed. I did come out the gig being like, that was great, but it could have been a little bit better in some places. But I had very little complaints, especially when it came to them actually playing the Silent Alarm album, which was really good. Every single song was played incredibly well. They were really confident. It was obvious that they had played all these songs so many times, so they knew how to do it front to back. They knew exactly how to communicate with the audience at the right moments, and of course the lighting and everything was incredible as well. It easily had some best but most simple visuals I'd seen at a gig this year. They played the album from back to front, which was a little bit strange, but when I saw the gig I thought, you know what, this actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. Some of the band's biggest songs on that album are actually right at the beginning, so I thought it made a little bit more sense to play them towards the end of the set. But it did mean the audience were kind of dead at first until the last few songs, where it was obvious that a lot of people only really knew Helicopter and Banquet and stuff. If there was one big problem I had with the show, it was probably the songs that they played in the encore. Because I'd never seen Bloc Party before, I was hoping in their encore they'd have like a mixture of songs from all over their career, because I've seen a lot of bands who have done like shows like this where they play a full album and they've played like some of the biggest hits from their other albums still in the encore. But here they played a couple songs off their second album, namely Flux and The Prayer, and there was a few songs from here and there. Most of them came from the early EPs that they made before this album. And of course, although it was cool to hear some of the B-sides from this album and the early songs that they put on the EPs, which is obvious that they don't really play that often, I guess I personally wasn't too familiar with them. I would have loved to have heard something like Octopus or something like that, one of their later songs that I think could have been really great live. They did play the song Ratchet from their Next Wave Sessions EP, which wasn't too great. I was kind of disappointed by that one. And The Love Within was supposed to be played, but there was a problem with their pedals, so they had to scrap it in the end. But apart from those few little problems, mostly with the encore, I thought the show was really great and I had an absolute blast. Next up I saw Car Seat Headrest at O2 Forum, Kentish Town. I didn't end up seeing the support act for this band, we actually got there late, but I did see Car Seat Headrest and they were really great. Obviously they're currently touring their Twin Fantasy re-release, so most of the set was from that album, and that's one of my favourite albums of the year, so I loved hearing those songs live. They are an incredible live band. It's amazing watching them because they have so much energy. They have two drummers, which at first I thought would be a bit odd, but it actually worked quite well, even if there were a lot of points where you couldn't really hear the other drummer. And They just have so much confidence on stage that you can't help but have a good time watching them. They play some of the longest songs off their new album, including Beach Life in Death, which is like a 15-minute song. But somehow they make it fun to watch. There was never a point where I was standing there, I was bored, like hoping for the next song. And of course, all the fan favourite songs from Teens of Denial were really great live. They also threw in Vincent for the first time in a few years, which was incredible because it's one of my favourite songs they've ever done. I honestly left the show, I didn't have any problems with it. I had a really great time. If they're touring near you, I definitely recommend going to check them out because they're a lot of fun. Next up we have Interpol, who I saw twice within a week somehow. The first time I saw them was in Glasgow for Transmit Festival, and the second time I saw them was when they supported The Cure at Hyde Park. And both times they were really great, but I'd probably say the Hyde Park performance was a lot better for a few reasons. The set list, although not completely different, was slightly different. There was a few different songs that they played here and there which I thought were a lot better the second time around. Not to mention the audience were so much more lively, way more into it in just every single way. It was obvious that there were actually a lot of Interpol fans there, which I wasn't surprised by because, you know, the Cure fans, I think, they fit Interpol way more than the people that were at Transmit Festival, most of whom were only there for like Arctic Monkeys and some of the younger indie bands like Blossoms and Nothing But Thieves. Whereas Interpol actually fit the lineup of Hyde Park and they were really great there. It's obvious that they were having a lot of fun there compared to the previous time where it was obvious that they were kind of sick of the fact that no one were really into them. And they blasted through a huge set which spanned pretty much their entire career. It was before their newest album had come out, so there was only like 1 or 2 songs from that new album. I think it may have just been The Rover. Most of the set list actually came from albums like Antics, and considering I love that album, it was cool to hear a lot of those songs live. Although I definitely would have loved to have heard a lot more from their very first album, because it's easily my favourite album by them. I was happy with the songs that they picked. All of the songs that they played really great. Even songs from their self-titled album, which I personally don't really like that album, I thought they pulled those songs off fantastically. And of course songs like Obstacle 1 and Slow Hands and All the Rage Back Home, all these fan-pleasing songs were really great live as well. It was obvious that they loved playing those songs. There was never a point where they were playing those bigger songs where I was like, yeah, they look like they're really sick of that song. They seemed to be really happy and really enjoying what they were doing, and that showed and came out and made me enjoy the set even more. I just really enjoyed them. I was kind of disappointed I didn't get to see them at Royal Albert Hall a few months back because the set lists there were just incredible, but I definitely would love to check these guys out again. I really got into them heavily this year, and I think Marauder is on my favourite albums of the year list. I'm pretty sure it's not high, but it's definitely on the list because I remember writing about it when I was writing the script, so I'll be talking a bit more about that album there. Next up we have my most recent and last gig of the year, Enter Shikari, that I saw at the Portsmouth Pyramids. Now I will admit that until this year I wasn't really a huge Enter Shikari fan. I loved The Spark from last year and put that high up on my favourite albums list, but their earlier more post-hardcore, electronica stuff I was never really a huge fan of. This year I kind of gave it the benefit of the doubt and actually gave it a proper listen and really got into it. And when they announced this huge tour playing all over the place, including Portsmouth, I had to go, and it was a really good show. When you see them, it's very obvious that they've been at it a long time and they know exactly what needs to be done to put on a really great, enjoyable, entertaining show. The set list was incredibly fan-pleasing, and that was very evident from the huge reception that I saw. The audience were absolutely mental. I was a little bit worried that the audience would react really great to the old songs, but then when they get to like the spark, everyone would just be kind of dead, like when I saw Arctic Monkeys, which we'll talk a little bit about later on in the video. But everyone seemed to know and love every single song. Everyone was singing along, jumping around, and it was a lot of fun. Not to mention the band's performance was just absolutely incredible. The uses of synthesizers mixed in with the guitars really worked well. I thought the layout of the set list was fantastic. I loved how they played a lot of their second album, Common Dreads. And I thought, apart from the lack of songs from the Mind Sweep, there was a huge amount of songs from all over their career, which I thought worked really well. Lead singer Rao also is just an incredible performer. It was insane how much energy he had. And I was also impressed at how they took some of the deeper cut songs that aren't as good as some of the other songs on the albums and somehow made them some of the best songs of the night. Probably one of the big highlights for me was The Revolt of the Atoms, and I will be completely honest, I hate that song. I think it's an absolutely terrible song, but it was absolutely incredible live. Up until that point, I thought some of the songs were a little bit hit or miss, but from Revolt of the Atoms onwards, there was not a single song that I didn't think was absolutely incredible. Although I wasn't really hugely into the quick fire round section, I think it's kind of cool to do a little medley of a load of songs, because it means you can get loads of songs together and just play them quickly, and it stretches out the set list a bit. It pleases fans because they get to hear little bits of their favourite songs, but the problem is I wanted to hear these songs in full. I wanted to hear all of Sorry You're Not a Winner, although they did basically play most of it. I wanted to hear all of The Last Garrison, which they only played like the bridge and the chorus, which they're the worst bits of the song. It's one of, if not my favourite, Shikari songs, so to only hear that tiny bit was really disappointing. The same with Anaesthetist, which they played a tiny section of, and it was literally a remix version, so it wasn't even the original. But apart from those problems, the setlist was fantastic. Their performance was really, really great. I had an absolute blast. Next up, we've got the band Metric, who I also saw at O2 Forum, Kentish Town. I was blown away. I had an absolute blast of a time. Although I was kind of disappointed at how little they played from the first album, I did still really enjoy all the songs they played. Most of the setlist was made up of Art of Doubt and Fantasy songs, but of course the setlist were full of fan favourites, full of the biggest songs that they've done. Of course, songs like Gimme Sympathy, Black Sheep, Gold Guns Girls, Monster Hospital, Help I'm Alive, Combat Baby, Dead Disco, all these incredible songs were played, and all of them were fantastic. I loved the visuals as well. Similar to Block Party, the visuals were very simple. It was mostly just like light strips, but the way they changed in different songs I thought was really, really cool. And of course, just to be in the audience and hear all these people sing all these songs, most of which I thought were just songs that I guess I only really know because I don't really know anyone else that likes this band. So to be around all these people who love them, know all these songs and scream them all was just an incredible moment. I will admit there was a couple bits that I found almost emotional, especially when everyone was singing Breathing Underwater, which I'll admit until recently was a song I wasn't really a big fan of, but when I got into it, I got heavily into it, and so being around people who knew every word was great. Same with Combat Baby, which is easily my favourite song by the band. All the songs from Art of Doubt were incredible. There was honestly very, very few songs that I didn't like on the set. I'd probably say Cascades from Pagans in Vegas is probably the only song I didn't like on the set anyway. Even songs like Artificial Nocturne, which I'm not really a huge fan of, were really great live. I didn't think there was like a dull moment. I thought the set from start to finish was a lot of fun. It was just really good. I had a great time. I'd definitely go check them out again. Next Next up we have the Wombats, who I saw at Southampton Guildhall. Going into this gig I was very skeptical because although the Wombats are one of my favourite bands, I really did not like the set list. The set list of course was full of really great songs from the first 3 albums, but there was a huge amount of songs from their newest album, which is on my favourite albums of the year list, that I didn't really like that much at the time. But I've got to give credit where credit's due. They were absolutely incredible. Every single song was fantastic. There was not a single song where I was like, yeah, I don't really like this. Every single song was fantastic. The crowd was ridiculously hectic and it was a lot of fun to be around. The energy of the crowd was incredibly infectious. There was not a single moment where you were standing there and you weren't surrounded by hundreds of people jumping up and down and pushing each other around. The band were incredibly energetic. There was not a single bad note. They hit everything really well. I was honestly surprised at how great the vocals were, because I've seen some videos of the band live and the vocals have been a bit hit or miss, but Matthew Murphy was just incredible. The set list, although I said I wasn't really a huge fan of, I thought worked way better live than it did listening to the songs. And of course, the band's biggest songs like Moving to New York and Kill the Director and Jump into the Fog, songs like that were just astounding. And of course I got to hear my favourite song by him, Greek Tragedy, which was the closing song, and that was incredible as well. There was not a single song I didn't think was absolutely fantastic. Visually it was really cool. They had a huge screen in the background that had loads of animations and stuff during the songs. It's impressive seeing these 3 guys and the amount of sounds that they've made. They all switch between their instruments as well as synthesizers and stuff, because the band have kind of an indie pop rock sort of sound. And the way they managed to switch between like playing their guitars and playing the synthesizers were flawless. There was never a moment where they forgot to switch or anything like that. It was impressive seeing how quick they were getting to each instrument and stuff. But it's very obvious that they have a lot of practice doing that. They've been around for almost 15 years and they've been doing exactly that their whole career. Yeah, I was completely blown away. I was not expecting them to be as good as they were. My only criticism was I would have loved to have heard a little bit more from the first album. I don't know, I would have probably preferred one of the deeper cuts instead of Let's Dance to Joy Division, which is probably my least favourite on the album and was actually one of my least favourites of the set. But in some ways I think that's just kind of nitpicking. But I was really disappointed that the Wombats have sold out Wembley. The second I get a chance to see him again, I'll be right in there. Next up is a band I saw twice this year, and both times they were incredible. It's kind of hard for me to decide a favourite time of the two, but yeah, they were just astounding. I'm talking about Arctic Monkeys. First time I saw them was at Transmit Festival in Glasgow. Second time I saw them was at the O2 Arena on the Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino tour. When I first saw them, I was of course incredibly excited. I went all the way to Glasgow just to see them, so it was going to be a huge moment because they're one of my favourite bands, and they did not disappoint. And of course the videos from Transmit Festival on YouTube have been really successful since then, and whenever I talk to people who are fans of Arctic Monkeys, they've been like completely shocked that I was there, because it seems to be such a huge concert in like the Arctic Monkeys community, which I think is because it was the first UK festival appearance of them in a few years. Not to mention the fact that it was just an all-around great show. The audience were ridiculous. Everyone knew every single song. They were all over the place. Although people were kind of dead for the Tranquility Base songs, which was a massive disappointment, when they were playing anything from any other album, everyone was just in the air, throwing stuff. You just could not move anywhere without being pushed over or anything like that. It's some of the most ridiculous energy I've ever seen in a crowd, which is I think why that video of the whole set has been so popular. I don't think there was a single song on the set list I didn't think was really great live, except for maybe Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High, but To be fair, I don't really like that song anyway. Getting to hear all the Tranquility Base songs live were really great. Of course, the band now, instead of just having the 4 members like usual, they have a huge amount of guest musicians, especially for the Tranquility Base songs, and the sound was just incredible. I think musically, they are easily one of the best sounding bands I've ever heard. Songs like 4 Out of 5 and Star Treatment were sonically incredible, and that goes for both times I saw them. But getting to hear songs like Brainstorm from the earlier albums and my favourite song from the Ritz to the Rubble was an incredible moment. It's obvious that the band have kind of aged a little bit and a lot of the songs are way slower than they ever were before, but it's still a lot of fun to hear them. There was still a lot of energy from the crowd, which made them much more fun, and there were very few, if any, dull moments throughout the set. When I saw them at the O2 Arena, the visuals were way better. Visually, it's one of the most stunning gigs I've ever seen, especially through songs like 4 Out of 5 from the new album. If there was one problem I had with the set, it's the set list. Although I love Tranquility Base, I think it's a fantastic album, they played so much of AM, which is an album I don't really like, and they played so little of the other albums. They did play about 5 or 6 songs from Favourite Worst Nightmare, which was cool, but from the other albums they played like 1 or 2 songs. Easily the highlight of the show for me both times, I'd say, was Pretty Visitors from Humbug, which was just mind-blowing. They actually cut it out of the footage for Transmit Festival, so you can't see the video of it from Transmit, but I think that may be one of, if not the best song I've seen any band do live. They were incredibly energetic. They didn't slow it down like they do with other songs. They were just as fast as it was on the album. Alex Turner managed to sing all the words at breakneck speed without missing a beat, without messing up a lyric, which was impressive considering the first time I saw them, he forgot a lot of the lyrics to some of the songs. But Miles Kane was at the festival and he did come out during one of the songs, so Alex Turner was most likely completely off his face at Transmit. But Pretty Visitors was just incredible. All the old songs were really great, even if they were a little bit slow. Do Me a Favour was probably the one where the new speed did not work in its favour at all, but they were incredible. I highly recommend checking them out if you're a fan of them. Just go in expecting Tranquility Base Hotel songs, because they play a lot of that, and I love that album, so I was happy to hear it. But it was obvious a lot of people weren't happy, so just go in with an open mind. They're a lot better live than they are on the album. Next up, we have a band that I didn't expect I'd ever get to see live. It was an incredible show. I'm of course talking about The Cure at Hyde Park this year. The Cure did a huge show at Hyde Park as part of the British Summertime Festival thing, and it was a big 40-year celebration. You'd think that they would have brought out like some of the older members that are still around, but no, it was just their current lineup playing a huge set full of songs from all their albums, or at least most of their albums. There were some albums like Pornography that had nothing from it, but they played their biggest hits, a bunch of fan pleasers, a bunch of deeper cuts from albums like Disintegration and Wish, which were both incredible. They played something like a 30-song set list. It was huge. Although the band are known for doing like 3.5, 4 hour shows, they were only on for about 2.5 hours, I think, in the end. But the amount of songs that they played and how incredibly fantastic they are live, it was a great night. Of course, we got to see the incredible visuals on the screen behind them, which, although for a lot of the songs were very, very basic, songs like Friday I'm in Love and Lullaby had some of the most astounding visuals I've ever seen. Some huge, incredible animations on the screens, which were just, they were just fantastic. And of course, the band's performance. There are bands that have been going at it for 40 years. They know exactly what they're doing. There was no way that they were going to sound terrible. Robert Smith sounds really great for his age as well. He's not like one of those musicians who, when he gets into his late 50s, early 60s, ends up sounding really awful. His voice sounds as great as ever. Of course, he can't hit many of those high notes on some of the earlier songs, but he still does a fantastic job. There are some songs where he did like falsetto and hit some high notes that I was really impressed by. Going into the show, I didn't know what to expect from the set list. Of course, they haven't really done a proper show in a couple of years, but luckily they played a huge amount of songs from all their albums, easily some of the best songs. It was a shame there was nothing from Pornography, which is one of my favourite Cure albums. I would have loved to have heard something like The Hanging Garden or 100 Years, but we did hear something like 6, maybe 7 or 8 songs from Disintegration, which is my favourite Cure album, easily like in my top 3 favourite albums of all time. So to hear those songs was just astounding. When they came out, the Plain song, I remember almost being in tears. It was only really Pictures of You that actually broke me. And later on in the set, how they ended the main set with their title track Disintegration was just an amazing moment, and it was easily the highlight of the set, one of the best songs I've ever seen live. It was just incredible. All the singles, of course, were fantastic. There was a huge omission, of course, of the Love Cats, which they never really seemed to play. But of course, the biggest songs like In Between Days, Just Like Heaven, Friday I'm in Love, Boys Don't Cry, all those songs were played and they were all incredible. I loved the encore, which although they didn't do multiple encores like they normally do, they put it all into one. It was cool to hear them sing all these older songs like Jumping Someone Else's Train and Boys Don't Cry, and of course 10:15 Saturday Night. It was obvious the crowd loved these old songs. There was not a single song that I thought the crowd weren't responding to and the crowd didn't know. I was actually impressed at how much of the crowd knew, because I was expecting it would be like me, maybe a few hundred other hardcore Cure fans, and then there would be like 10,000 people who just knew Friday I'm in Love. But luckily everyone seemed to know all the songs, and I was very surprised by that. As I said, they're a band that have been going for 40 years. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were just astoundingly good. They blew me away. The band were really, really great. It was a lot of fun, and I'd definitely go check them out again if I got the chance. Sky is a neighborhood. Next up is probably the band you expected, and I expected for a long time would be the #1 best band I've seen. I'd honestly say the top 5 of this list are like top 5 bands I've ever seen. So I expected this band would be #1 because they're my favourite band. I've talked about them many, many times. I'm wearing a shirt of one of their albums. Of course, I saw Foo Fighters this year at the London Olympic Stadium as part, I think they did a 2-night thing. I saw them on the first night, and words can't describe how incredible they were. They played for about 2.5 hours, as you would expect from Foo Fighters, and it was a huge set spanning all their albums. There was not a single album that got forgotten about, even if like albums like Echoes, Silence, Patience and Grace only got like 1 song. And of course they played a lot of Concrete and Gold, which I have to say I'm not a huge fan of Concrete and Gold. It's not terrible, but it's not really that good. But the songs from it were actually pretty good live. Run was really good. The Sky is a Neighborhood was fantastic. Sunday Rain was, yeah, probably best we just forget about that song. But hearing all these huge songs with the amount of people there, it was something ridiculous, like 30,000 people or something. It was a gigantic venue. To be around these tens of thousands of people who knew all the Foo Fighters songs, who were screaming every single word, it was an incredible experience. Similar to The Cure, there was the Golden Circle bit, which took up a lot of space, so we were really far back, and even in general admission bit, we were quite far back as well, because we arrived kind of late. The visuals and everything were just astounding, so it didn't really matter. The screens, of course, looked really cool, and as far back as we were, we could still see the full bands there. And of course there was the catwalk bit, which the end of the catwalk was not that far away from where we were standing at all. So when Dave Grohl came out to do My Hero and stood at the end of the catwalk to start it off completely just him and an electric guitar. We were not that far away, and I can't describe how incredible that moment was. Getting to be that close to possibly my favorite musician in the world it's a moment I'm going to cherish for the rest of my life. Of course, they played some of the best songs of their entire career. Like, they played all their singles. There's not really a single huge song by them that they didn't play. And of course, they ended with Everlong, my all-time favorite song, and that was possibly one of the greatest moments of my life, getting to hear my favorite song with that many people. All the fireworks and everything was going off. The performance was just incredible. It was just a really, really great moment. I don't think I'm ever going to forget. As many gigs I've been to, I can admit that there's a lot where bits of it have kind of faded away into my mind. I don't remember that much, but I remember that song incredibly vividly. And I don't think I'm ever going to forget that, because it was such a powerful moment for me. Their set list, although I think could have been a lot better, was still really, really good. There was very few songs that I thought were really disappointing or really bad. The only song I didn't really like was The Pretender, which I was surprised by. But that was literally just because they stretched it out way too much. They added this like 10-minute instrumental section, which was really, really boring. Like, seriously, I was just standing there like, okay, this is kind of cool, but like, can you play My Hero or something? I want something I can sing along to. I don't want to just stand there. I'm kind of bored now. And I felt like a lot of people around me were kind of like that as well. But luckily there were very few moments like that. For the most part, they got through every single song without dicking around too much, which they are known to do quite a lot during their songs. They seem to stretch out a lot of their songs ridiculous amounts, but they luckily didn't do that as much as I was expecting them to do. They just did it a ridiculous amount during The Pretender. It's Foo Fighters. They were incredible. They're one of those bands that you would expect will put on a great show, because they're one of the biggest bands in the world. You'd expect them to be great, and they really, really were. It's a shame I didn't get to see them in a smaller venue than this. Getting to see them at a stadium was, in some ways, it was really cool. In other ways, it was a little bit too much. I would have loved to have gone to one of the smaller, really intimate surprise shows that they do. I know someone who's actually been to quite a few of them, and I'm incredibly jealous. I'll see them again if they tour. They were incredible. There's no way I can miss out on them again. It was a great moment to finally see them. Surprisingly, my favourite gig this year was Jack White, who is easily the best performer I've ever seen. The White Stripes are one of my favourite bands, but until just before this tour, I never really got into Jack White's solo stuff, and I'd never really listened to like the Dead Weather or the Raconteurs either. I loved Lazaretto, like the song Lazaretto, but I never really could get into his solo stuff. But I gave it a proper listen. I listened to Boarding House Reach, of course, which is one of the best albums of the year in my opinion, and I listened to his other two albums, both of which I really, really liked. So I was excited. I went in expecting he's gonna probably put on a really good show. I didn't expect him to be as incredible as he was. Of course, he's not really a great singer. I don't think anyone listens to Jack White or the White Stripes and goes, oh my god, he has one of the best voices I've ever heard. His voice isn't great, and it's not meant to be great. The amount of emotion that he portrays and how broken and raw his voice is incredible, and in some of the slower songs that he did, it was just absolutely beautiful. Of course, his guitar work is absolutely top-notch. I easily think he's possibly the best guitarist I've ever seen live. I love how everything feels very, very natural. Even when doing like the more electronic and experimental sounds from his new album, it felt much more real than I expected it would. This is the first tour where he's not had loads of people doing like violins and fiddles and stuff. It is literally just him a bassist, a drummer, and 2 keyboardists. But that smaller lineup actually worked really well, and it made a lot of the songs feel much more straightforward, way rawer. I've looked at the set lists of all the shows that he's played this year. I saw him at Brighton Centre, and I think the Brighton Centre show is one of the best set lists he's ever done. Of course, I would have loved to have heard some of the bigger White Stripes songs that he didn't do, like Icky Thump or Blue Orchid, which he didn't do, but he, of course, played songs like Seven Nation Army, which is probably my least favourite on Elephant, but he played it and it was really good live. But his set list spanned his entire career, not just his solo stuff. There was a load of songs from the White Stripes, the Dead Weather and the Raconteurs, all of which were absolutely fantastic. He's gone on record to say that his set lists, he doesn't write his set list down, he comes up on the spot with his set list. He has a basic idea, like he'll start off with Over and Over and then go into Corporation, but after that it's pretty much just up in the air, he can do whatever he wants, and that made the show more exciting because you didn't know what was going to happen next. You could never predict what he was going to do. He kept taking huge twists and turns and playing songs out of nowhere that you were not expecting him to play. There were a lot of moments where he was playing a song and it would come to a crashing end, and before you got time to breathe or clap or anything like that, he just blasted into a riff of Hello Operator or Dead Leaves in the Dirty Ground, two of my favourite White Stripes songs, and getting to hear them live was just an incredible moment. It was so exciting getting to be there and him just taking these huge turns and going in directions out of nowhere. Every single song on the set list I was just completely floored by. There are a lot of songs that I admittedly was not really a big fan of before that show. I was never really into Connected by Love, didn't really like Why Walk a Dog that much from his new album, and older songs I wasn't really into Highball Stepper, to be honest, or that Black Bat Licorice, and all those songs ended up being some of my highlights of the show. He did them really well. And there was a lot of songs as well that I wasn't really too familiar with and didn't really know that ended up being some of the best songs I've ever seen live. He took the song I Cut Like a Buffalo by the Dead Weather, which I love that song, but I can't say it's one of those songs where you listen to it and you're like, yeah, that's the standout song, I think that could be incredible live. But somehow it was one of the greatest musical experiences I've ever had at a concert. Like, I'd only heard it once or twice before and I kind of forgot it, but I remember by the end of that song I was in tears because it was just so astounding. I was just so blown away by how incredible live it was. I think the simplicity of the show, how everything is all about the music. He doesn't have all flashy visuals and stuff. He doesn't have a huge band or anything. It's just a small group of people on a stage playing these songs. I think the way he plays it was such an emphasis on the songs and nothing else was just absolutely incredible. I left that gig honestly with a newfound appreciation of live music. Of course, I go to live gigs all the time and I love going to them. I love the experience of standing in a crowd with so many people that love these songs as well, and I love getting into it, jumping around and stuff, but that gig made me realise that sometimes it's best literally just to stand there and listen, because there's nothing more powerful in the end than the music, and that was what I thought Jack White did really well. Getting to hear all these smaller White Stripes songs was really cool as well. He did songs like Little Bird, which I was not expecting him to do. Hello Operator, of course, I mentioned earlier, which is one of, if not my favourite song by them, so I didn't expect that he would do that in a million years. So when he started playing that riff, I just completely lost it. I honestly think about that set list and think about all the songs, and there was not a single dull moment. It went on for about 2 hours, the set, I think, in the end, and by the time it had ended, I was like, does it have to end? Like, there's so many more songs I want to hear. He could have done so much more. I have told a lot of people that I saw Jack White and he's the best performer I've ever seen. And I think every single person I've said have been completely shocked, because they're like, but didn't you see Foo Fighters this year? Like, surely they would be the best, or Arctic Monkeys, but no, Jack White. I honestly can't describe how incredible he was. His blending of different genres like jazz and blues, and of course his newer album, how it has more electronic and experimental sounds, it made me want to go out and explore different music. Jack White was just incredible. All these bands on this list were fantastic, and there's loads of other bands that I wanted to talk about that I love, but these are just the top 10. I've already gone on for way longer than I ever expected I would. I thought this would be like a 15-minute video at most, but I've got a lot of editing to do. I've got loads more list videos coming out soon, so please go check them out. Hopefully you enjoyed this rambling video, and I'll see you sometime soon for the next video.